Hey there. Welcome to Shadow Archives. Just a heads up, there are a few ads in the first 10 minutes, then it's completely ad-free. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax or drift off to sleep. I hope you'll give this video a chance because I truly believe you won't find stories quite like these anywhere else. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. I was about 5 or 6 years old, small enough that the world still felt huge and mostly harmless. I didn't have the kind of awareness adults have, the instinct that tells you when something is wrong, even if nothing obvious has happened yet. At that age, people were just people. Cars were just cars. If someone smiled at you or talked to you, it usually meant nothing more than they were being friendly. I was in the front yard with my older brother, who was about 2 years older than me. We were doing whatever kids do when they're left alone outside for a bit, probably running around, playing with dirt, making up games that didn't have rules. It was a normal day. The kind of day that doesn't stand out until you look back at it with adult eyes. Then a car pulled up. I don't remember the make or the color. I don't remember if it was clean or beat up. What I remember is that there was a man and a woman inside. A couple. That detail matters now in a way it didn't then. At the time, it just registered as 2 adults in a car, which felt safer somehow than just one person. Couples didn't seem dangerous. Couples seemed normal. I can't remember exactly what they said or did. That part is blurry, like my brain never bothered to record the details. But I do remember that they enticed me. They said something that made me want to come closer. Maybe they asked a question. Maybe they offered help. Maybe they pointed at something interesting. Whatever it was, it worked. I started walking toward their car. There was no fear in me, no hesitation, no sense that I was doing something wrong. Kids don't have the same internal alarms adults do, especially when nothing bad has ever happened to them before. To me, this was just another interaction, another moment in a normal afternoon. What I didn't understand was that the moment I started moving, everything changed. My brother noticed. Something about the situation triggered him in a way it didn't trigger me. Maybe it was the way the car stopped. Maybe it was the way they were talking. Maybe it was pure instinct. Whatever it was, he realized something wasn't right before I did. And that realization hit him fast. As I got closer, the woman reached out of the car. She tried to grab me. That is the moment where the story splits into 2 versions of reality. The one that happened, and the one that almost did. My brother reacted instantly. There was no thinking, no planning. He grabbed my arm as hard as he could and started pulling me back toward the yard. At the same time, he started screaming, not yelling words, just screaming, loud, panicked, desperate screaming. That scream saved my life. The woman let go immediately. There was no struggle, no argument, no pretending anymore. The car took off fast, tires biting into the road as they sped away up the street. They didn't stop to explain. They didn't slow down. They didn't look back. They just fled. That alone tells you everything you need to know. My mom came running out of the house, drawn by the noise. She saw the car disappearing down the road. She saw my brother crying, shaking, still holding on to me. She saw me standing there, confused. Not really understanding why everyone was suddenly so upset. I didn't know what had just happened. I remember looking around like I was trying to figure out what I had missed. I wasn't crying. I wasn't scared yet. I was just disoriented. One moment I had been playing, the next moment there was yelling, a car racing away, and my brother in tears. At that age, I couldn't put meaning to it. I didn't understand intent. I didn't understand danger. I didn't understand how close I had come to something irreversible. It took years for that understanding to settle in. As a child, the memory existed more as a strange moment than a traumatic one. Something weird happened. A car drove off. My brother freaked out. Life continued. Kids are good at moving on when the adults around them move on. And after that day, no one ever came back. There was no visible consequence, so my brain filed it away. But as I got older, and especially as I learned more about the world, the memory changed shape. At some point, you gain enough context to reprocess the past. You learn about abduction. You learn about predators. You learn that most harm doesn't come from dramatic movie villains, but from people who look normal enough to approach a child in broad daylight. You learn that couples can be just as dangerous as individuals, sometimes more, and then the memory hits differently. I started to understand that the woman didn't reach out to play. She didn't reach out to help me up. She reached out to take me. The man didn't stop her. He was part of it. The speed with which they left wasn't panic over being misunderstood. It was panic over being interrupted. If my brother hadn't been there, or if he had hesitated for even a second, the outcome would have been completely different. That realization is sickening when it finally lands. You start to see the alternate path. You imagine being pulled into the car, the door slamming shut, the street disappearing, your house shrinking in the distance, your brother's screams fading. You imagine the confusion turning into fear. You imagine never coming home. And once you go down that road mentally, it's hard to stop. I don't like to exaggerate, but there's no gentle way to say it. I was almost certainly headed for rape and murder, or worse, prolonged abuse followed by disappearance. The statistics don't leave much room for optimism. Children taken like that rarely come back, and when they do, they are never the same. The thing that messes with me the most is how casual it was. No disguise, no urgency, no attempt to hide. It happened in my own front yard, in daylight, on a normal street, while my family was home. That tells you how confident they were, how practiced, how many times they had probably done something like this before. It also tells you how fragile safety really is. The difference between my life as it is now and a life that ended before it ever really began came down to one thing: my brother's instinct. A kid 2 years older than me realizing something was wrong and acting without hesitation. He didn't analyze it. He didn't second-guess himself. He didn't worry about being wrong or overreacting. He just acted. That kind of clarity is rare, especially in children. When I think about it now, I feel a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude, obviously. I owe him everything. Fear, because of how close it was. Anger, because those people were never caught. And a deep, unsettling awareness that so much of life is decided by moments we barely notice at the time. I also think about how confused I was afterward. That sticks with me too. I wasn't traumatized in the moment. I didn't understand that I had just escaped something horrific. The trauma came later, when I gained the ability to understand what almost happened. That delayed fear is a weird thing. It sneaks up on you years later when you're no longer vulnerable in the same way. Your body reacts to a memory that your childhood mind couldn't process. Your adult brain fills in the blanks, and suddenly the past becomes terrifying. Pretty glad my life doesn't have that in it right now, doesn't even begin to cover it. I have a life. I have experiences. I have memories that exist because I wasn't taken that day. I have a future that only happened because my brother screamed. Sometimes I wonder how many people walking around have similar near misses buried in their past. How many stories never get told because nothing technically happened. How many lives were saved by accident, by timing, by someone else's awareness. And sometimes I wonder about the kids who didn't have someone there to grab their arm. That thought sits heavy. What happened to me didn't define my childhood, but it redefined my understanding of it. It taught me retroactively that danger doesn't always look dangerous, that trust can be used against you, that kids are vulnerable in ways they can't possibly understand. It also taught me something about courage, not the loud, heroic kind, the instinctive kind, the kind that doesn't wait for permission. My brother probably doesn't think of himself as a hero. To him, it was just a moment, a reaction, something that happened and then passed. But from where I stand now, decades later, that moment was everything. I don't walk around afraid all the time. I don't live in that what if. But every now and then, the memory resurfaces and I feel that chill, that awareness of how close I came to never having any of this. And every time it does, I feel the same thing: relief, gratitude, and a quiet, unsettling respect for how thin the line between safety and horror can really be. When I was 7 years old, I thought I understood the world pretty well. I knew the limits of my yard, the sound of my aunt's front porch creaking when someone stepped on it, the feel of rocks scraping together under a rake. I knew the rhythm of farm life, the smell of dirt, oil, and sun-warmed metal. I knew how to do things most kids my age didn't, because I grew up around machines, animals, and adults who expected you to learn fast. At 7, I felt capable, independent, safe. That sense of safety is what makes this memory so disturbing now. I was in my aunt's front yard, raking rocks. Not grass, not leaves, but rocks. The kind of pointless, tedious chore adults give kids to keep them busy. The sun was out. The day felt ordinary. My mom was nearby, somewhere around the garage. Nothing felt off. Nothing felt threatening. It was just another quiet moment in childhood, the kind you don't think twice about while it's happening. Then a beat-up pickup truck pulled up. It wasn't flashy or loud. It didn't screech to a stop or draw attention. It just rolled up and parked like it belonged there. That alone didn't register as strange to me at the time. On a farm, vehicles come and go. People stop to ask questions. Neighbors pass through. A truck pulling up wasn't alarming. A man got out. I remember him opening the hood and messing with something underneath, like he was checking the engine or pretending to fix a problem. That part felt normal too. Adults fix cars. Adults have car trouble. I kept raking, half watching, half focused on my task. Then he closed the hood and looked at me. He spoke casually, like this was no big deal at all. "Hey kid," he said, "do you know how to pop a clutch?" Because of how I was raised, because of farm life, because adults had always involved me in things, the answer was yes. I actually did know how. That mattered later. At the time, it just felt like a fact. "Yes," I said. He smiled and said, "Give me a hand real quick." And I did exactly what a helpful, trusting kid would do. I started walking toward his truck. Nothing in his tone set off alarms. Nothing in his body language screamed danger. He didn't grab me. He didn't rush me. He didn't threaten me. He just asked for help. That's what makes it so terrifying in hindsight. It was smooth, normal, friendly. I was only a few steps away when my mom called out to me from the garage. I don't even remember what she said. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I turned around. I looked away from the truck. I shifted my attention for just a second. In that second, everything changed. I heard the truck door slam. I heard the engine turn over, and then the truck drove away. Just like that. No explanation, no wave, no never mind. He didn't wait to see if I would come back. He didn't say anything else. He just left. At 7 years old, that didn't register as terrifying. It was odd, sure, confusing. But kids are very good at absorbing strange moments and then letting them drift away. I went back to raking rocks. The day continued. Life went on. The memory sank somewhere deep and stayed there, quiet, for decades. It didn't haunt my childhood. It didn't show up in my dreams. It didn't feel important. It was just a weird thing that happened once. a random moment with no clear meaning. So my brain did what brains often do with unfinished stories. It filed it away and moved on, until one night, about 30 years later, I was laying down to go to bed. Nothing special about the day, nothing stressful. My body was tired, my mind was calm. And then, out of nowhere, the memory came back. Not gently, not like a distant thought. It slammed into me. I sat straight up in bed, heart pounding, breath catching in my chest, because suddenly I wasn't remembering it as a child anymore. I was seeing it as an adult, with adult understanding, adult context, adult awareness of how the world really works. And the realization hit me all at once. That man was trying to kidnap me. There was no other explanation, none that made sense. He didn't need help popping a clutch. Even if he did, he wouldn't ask a 7-year-old. And the timing of his exit made it unmistakable. The moment my mom called out, the moment he realized I wasn't alone, he aborted the plan and disappeared. I dodged something massive. That realization was so sudden and so violent that my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I started shaking, not shivering, shaking. My hands trembled, my chest felt tight. My stomach dropped like I was falling. I kept thinking, what bullet did I dodge? What would have happened if my mom hadn't called out? What if she'd been inside the house? What if I'd taken 2 more steps? What if I'd reached the truck door? There are no answers to those questions, and that's part of what makes it unbearable. My mind tried to fill in the blanks, and every version was worse than the last. Kidnapping, abuse, murder, being taken somewhere I'd never come back from, becoming one of those kids whose faces end up on posters, whose names are spoken in the past tense, all because someone asked for help. I was shaking for at least half an hour. I couldn't calm down. I couldn't distract myself. My body was stuck in fight or flight, reacting to a threat that was decades old but suddenly very real. It felt like it had just happened, like I had just escaped. That's the part people don't talk about much. How memory can lie dormant and then come back with teeth. How your nervous system doesn't care that the danger is over. It reacts as if it's happening now. I kept replaying the sound of the door slamming, the engine starting, the truck pulling away. At the time, it had felt neutral. Now it sounded like an ending I narrowly avoided. What scares me the most is how ordinary it all was. No white van, no candy, no dramatic chase, just a man in a beat-up pickup, using a simple, believable excuse, using knowledge I happened to have against me. He didn't need force. He just needed me to take a few more steps. It makes you realize how thin the line can be between safety and disaster. How many close calls never get labeled as such because nothing actually happened. We only count the tragedies, we don't count the almosts. And yet, those almosts leave marks too. Looking back, I think about how kids are taught to fear obvious dangers, but not subtle ones. We warn them about strangers, but strangers don't always look scary. Sometimes they look normal, helpful, broken down, in need. I also think about how lucky I was. Not because I was smart, not because I did something right. Pure luck, timing, a voice from the garage at exactly the right second. That's it. That realization messes with you. It makes you wonder how many other moments in your life were decided by chance. How many people are alive because of tiny interruptions? How many aren't? Even now, thinking about it still freaks me out. My chest tightens, my skin prickles. That sense of dread comes back, quieter than that first night, but still there. The fear isn't about the man anymore. It's about the fragility of safety, the idea that something so life-altering could have happened without drama, without witnesses, without warning. I've talked to other people since then, and I learned something unsettling. A lot of them have stories like this. Moments that didn't seem important until years later. A car that slowed down, a hand that reached out, a question that now sounds wrong, and the same reaction comes up again and again. You ever have a memory come back and get scared over it? Not scared like watching a horror movie. Scared like your body remembers something your mind hadn't processed yet. Scared like you realize you were vulnerable in a way you couldn't see at the time. What happened to me didn't leave scars you can see. It didn't change my life path, but it changed how I understand my past. It reframed my childhood. It reminded me that danger doesn't always announce itself. That truck drove away and my life continued. But somewhere out there, that man kept driving, and I will never know what his intentions fully were, only that they weren't good. That thought sits heavy. I survived something without ever knowing it at the time. And that's the part that still shakes me, because it means safety is sometimes invisible, and danger is sometimes quiet. And the difference between the two can be nothing more than a voice calling your name from the garage. And if that doesn't make you uneasy, I don't know what would. I was about 10 years old enough to walk home alone after soccer practice, but still young enough to believe that bad things mostly happened to other people. That evening felt normal in every way. Practice ended, I said goodbye to my teammates, and I started the familiar walk home. I knew every crack in the sidewalk, every house along the way. My mind was probably on small things, what I would eat when I got home, whether I had homework, whether my brother would be around to annoy me. Nothing felt wrong. As I got closer to my house, something unusual caught my eye. There was a police car parked near the driveway. At first, it didn't fully register. It felt out of place, like a detail that didn't belong in the picture I had in my head of what home was supposed to look like. I slowed down without really knowing why. A small part of me noticed that the car wasn't just on the street. It was actually in our driveway. Before I could make sense of that, the officer got out of the car. He walked toward me calmly and asked a simple question. He asked if I lived there. I nodded and said yes, still not fully understanding what was happening. My brain was trying to connect dots that didn't want to line up. Police cars didn't come to houses for no reason, but at 10 years old, I didn't yet know what reasons were possible. Then he told me my brother had been in an accident. I remember the words hitting me, but not landing all at once. It was like hearing something in a foreign language. Accident could mean a lot of things. Kids fall, bikes crash, people get hurt, and then they're fine. I was searching for a version of the story that didn't end badly, because I didn't know how to imagine anything else. The officer walked to the back of his car and opened the trunk. That moment is burned into me in a way that time hasn't softened at all. He pulled out my brother's bicycle. It was destroyed. The frame was bent and twisted in ways a bike should never bend. The wheels were warped. Parts were broken off completely. Then he pulled out the helmet. The helmet looked crushed, like something heavy had come down on it with force. It didn't look like something that protected someone. It looked like something that had failed under pressure. My brother wasn't there. That detail mattered more than anything else. The bike was there. The helmet was there. But my brother wasn't standing next to the officer. He wasn't walking toward the house. He wasn't yelling, joking, or brushing it off like he usually did. He was missing from the picture, and my mind filled that absence with terror. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I froze. Everything inside me went cold at once. I remember feeling like the world had suddenly tilted, like I wasn't standing on solid ground anymore. I was 10 years old, staring at proof that something terrible had happened, with no idea how bad it really was. The officer was calm. He spoke gently. He explained that my brother had survived. He told me he was alive. He said he was in the hospital. He explained that he had been badly injured, that he would need surgery, that he would be there for a while. But those words came after the image, and the image had already done its damage. At that age, logic comes second to visuals. All I could see was the bike. All I could see was the helmet. All I could see was the empty space where my brother should have been. Inside the house, my father was home. He was on the phone, dealing with something completely unrelated, unaware that our lives had just split into before and after. I ran inside and tried to explain what was happening. I remember telling him there was a cop at the door. I remember him not understanding at first, maybe thinking it was something minor, maybe thinking I was exaggerating or confused. I was panicking, but I didn't yet have the words to explain why. The officer waited outside patiently. He didn't rush. He didn't leave. He stood there, understanding that the adults needed to catch up to what had already happened. Eventually, my father realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. He got off the phone. The gravity of the situation finally landed. We went to the hospital. That drive felt endless. I don't remember much of what was said in the car. I remember silence more than anything. A heavy, uncomfortable silence filled with unspoken fear. I kept replaying the image of the bike in my head over and over again, as if my brain was trying to prepare me for the worst. When we arrived, everything moved fast and slow at the same time. Hospitals have a way of doing that. Bright lights, white walls, the smell of disinfectant, people walking quickly with serious faces. I remember being aware that this was a place where bad things happened, even if good outcomes were still possible. My brother had been riding fast. That part came later. He was always a fast rider, fearless in a way older siblings sometimes are. A van cut him off suddenly and slammed on the brakes. He didn't have time to stop. He went over the handlebars and into the van. His helmet took the impact. His body took the rest. That helmet saved his life. That thought comes with its own strange weight. The same helmet that looked crushed and horrifying was also the reason he survived. At 10 years old, that was hard to hold in my head. Something could look so broken and still have done its job. He spent a week in the hospital. He needed surgery. Recovery took a long time. There were scars, pain, frustration, and months of healing. But he survived. He recovered. Eventually, life found a new normal. From the outside, it was a success story, a bad accident, a close call, a recovery. People say things like lucky or it could have been worse. And they're right. It could have been worse. I know that. But that doesn't erase what that moment did to me. I was a child who learned all at once how fragile everything is. The scariest part wasn't the hospital or the surgery or the recovery. It was that first moment, the sight of his bike coming out of the trunk while he wasn't there. That single image taught me something my brain wasn't ready to understand yet. It taught me that people you love can disappear without warning, that normal days can turn into emergencies in seconds. That safety is not guaranteed just because things have always been fine before. That feeling hasn't gone away in 25 years. I can still feel it in my chest when I think about it. That hollow, sinking panic. That moment where your stomach drops and your heart races and your mind scrambles for answers it can't find. Even now, as an adult, that memory brings back the same physical response. My body remembers it as danger, even though the danger is long gone. I think part of what made it so terrifying was how alone I felt in that moment. My brother was hurt. My parents were overwhelmed. The officer was kind, but he was still a stranger, delivering news that shattered my sense of safety. I was a kid standing in the middle of something far bigger than me, trying to process it without the emotional tools to do so. That kind of fear doesn't always show up as nightmares or obvious trauma. Sometimes it just sits quietly in the background of your life. It shows up when a phone rings unexpectedly, when you see emergency lights near your home, when you hear about accidents involving people you love. Your chest tightens before your brain has time to reason with it. Even now, when I think about police cars pulling into driveways, I feel that old tension, That instinctive fear that something bad has happened again. That memory taught my nervous system a lesson it never forgot. What stays with me most is how sudden it was. One minute I was walking home from soccer practice, thinking about nothing important at all. The next minute my world felt like it might collapse. There was no build-up, no warning, just a sharp turn into fear. I think about that sometimes when people talk about childhood as a time of innocence. It is until it isn't. Sometimes innocence doesn't fade slowly. Sometimes it shatters in a single moment, and you carry the pieces with you into adulthood. My brother lived. That matters more than anything. I am endlessly grateful for that. I can say that and mean it fully. But gratitude and fear can coexist. Relief doesn't erase trauma, it just sits beside it. That experience changed how I see the world. It made me more aware of risk, more sensitive to sudden changes, more attuned to the idea that life can pivot in an instant. It also gave me a deep appreciation for the people we love being here at all. The image of that bike, bent and broken, has stayed with me longer than any other childhood memory, longer than games, holidays, or victories. It represents a moment where I came face to face with the idea of loss before I was ready to understand it. 25 years later, the feeling is still there. Quieter maybe, less sharp, but still present. A reminder of how close everything came to being different. A reminder of how fast everything can change. I don't think that feeling will ever fully go away. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's the cost of learning too early that life is fragile. Maybe it's the price of loving someone deeply and realizing how easily they can be taken from you. All I know is that the sight of his bike coming out of that trunk and him not being there carved something into me that time hasn't erased. And honestly, I don't think it ever will. I was about 8 years old when I used to help my dad at the fast food place he was working at. It was family-owned, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where kids grew up behind the counter and learned responsibility early. Back then, it felt normal to be there. It felt safe. It felt like an extension of home rather than a workplace. My job was simple. I handed out drinks. I stood behind the counter, barely tall enough to see over it properly, grabbing cups, filling them with soda, snapping lids on, and passing them across with both hands. Customers smiled at me. Some joked about having a junior employee. Some tipped extra because they thought it was cute. I liked feeling helpful. I liked being trusted with something important, even if it was small. To me, the restaurant was a safe bubble. My dad was there. Other adults I knew were there. The kitchen noises were familiar. The smell of fries and grease was comforting. I didn't think of it as a public place where anyone could walk in. I thought of it as our place. That illusion broke quietly. One day, a customer started talking to me while I was handing him his drink. He wasn't loud or aggressive. He didn't look scary. He looked normal. Middle-aged, casual, friendly in that way adults often are when talking to kids. Nothing about him set off immediate alarm bells. He started telling me about his RV. He said he had medication in it. He said he needed help getting it. He said it was parked nearby. The way he said it made it sound reasonable, like he was asking for a favor like adults often do with kids, because kids are eager to help. He didn't demand. He didn't threaten. He just talked, casually, as if this were a perfectly normal thing to ask an 8-year-old. And then he asked if I could go with him to help him get the meds. I remember the moment clearly, even now, not because it was dramatic, but because of how ordinary it felt on the surface. There was no movie-style tension, no sudden fear, no dramatic pause. Just a question asked calmly, in a place that felt safe. But something stopped me. It wasn't fear exactly. It wasn't a clear understanding of danger. It was more like hitting a wall I couldn't see, but somehow knew was there. A rule I didn't fully understand, but had been taught to follow anyway. I said no. I didn't give a speech. I didn't explain. I didn't justify myself. I just said no. And that no came from something my parents had drilled into me over and over again. Don't go with strangers. You don't help strangers outside. Don't leave the building. Don't trust people you don't know. At the time, those rules felt abstract, overprotective, kind of annoying. I didn't fully understand why they mattered. They were just rules. But in that moment, they mattered. The man didn't argue. He didn't push. He didn't get angry. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just dropped it, finished the interaction, took his drink, and left. That part is important. If it had been innocent, if he truly just needed help, there would have been confusion. He might have laughed it off and asked an adult instead. He might have said, "Oh, okay, no problem," and gone to my dad, but he didn't. He simply disengaged and walked away. At 8 years old, I didn't analyze that. I didn't think about what it meant. I went right back to filling drinks. Life continued. The shift went on. Customers came and went. The memory faded into the background. But as an adult, I look back at that moment with a very different understanding. An adult asking a child to leave a building to go to an RV is not normal. An adult asking a child for help with medication outside is not appropriate. An adult bypassing other adults to ask a child directly is a red flag. All of those things are obvious now. They were not obvious then. What saved me wasn't intelligence or bravery or awareness. It was repetition. It was parents who had said the same thing so many times that it became automatic. It was a boundary that existed before I understood why it needed to exist. That realization is unsettling, because it means that if my parents hadn't been strict about strangers, if they had framed it differently, if they had been more relaxed, I might have said yes, not because I wanted to do something wrong, but because I wanted to be helpful, because kids are taught to listen to adults, because refusing an adult doesn't come naturally at that age. I think about how easily it could have gone another way. What if he had said he needed help carrying something heavy? What if he had said my dad sent him? What if he had framed it as an emergency? Kids don't have the tools to question those things unless someone gives them those tools ahead of time. What also sticks with me is how subtle it was. There was no grabbing, no rushing, no raised voice, just a conversation, just a suggestion. That's often how danger actually works. It doesn't announce itself. It tests boundaries quietly. The restaurant felt safe because it was familiar. But that safety was borrowed. Anyone could walk in. Anyone could talk to me. The fact that my dad was nearby didn't stop someone from trying. As an adult, that thought makes my stomach tighten. I also think about how easily this could have been dismissed if I had mentioned it later. If I had told someone casually, "Yeah, a guy asked me to help him get meds from his RV," someone might have laughed and said he was probably just weird, or old, or confused. People often minimize these moments because nothing bad happened. But nothing bad happened because of that no. Because of those rules. Because of parents who didn't care if I thought they were annoying or unfair. Looking back, I'm struck by how much responsibility we place on children without realizing it. Adults say things like kids should know better, kids should speak up, the kids should run away. But knowing better requires preparation. Speaking up requires permission. Running away requires the belief that you're allowed to say no to adults. I had that belief, even if I didn't understand it fully, and the man's reaction still bothers me. He didn't escalate. He didn't seek another child. He didn't ask an adult for help. He left. That suggests he was testing something, testing whether I would comply, testing whether I would cross that line. When I didn't, the opportunity vanished. I wonder how many times he had tried that before, how many times it worked, how many kids didn't have that rule ingrained deeply enough to stop them. That thought is heavy. At 8 years old, I went on with my life, unaware that I had dodged something. I didn't feel shaken. I didn't feel scared. I didn't tell the story dramatically. It was just a weird interaction that didn't go anywhere. The fear came later with understanding. It came when I was old enough to see how predators operate, when I learned how often kids are taken from familiar places, when I understood that RVs are mobile, untraceable, private spaces, when I realized that medication is a common excuse because it implies urgency and vulnerability. Suddenly, that memory wasn't small anymore. It became a moment where my entire life could have split in a different direction. I think about how close danger often is, even in places we consider safe. Family businesses, schools, neighborhoods, workplaces. The threat doesn't always come from dark alleys. Sometimes it comes in daylight, with a calm voice and a reasonable sounding request. What stayed with me most isn't fear, it's gratitude. Gratitude for parents who were repetitive and firm. Gratitude for rules that didn't make sense at the time. Gratitude for a childhood no that didn't require explanation, that no was enough. It also changed how I think about teaching kids boundaries, not in abstract ways, not with vague warnings, but with clear rules and repetition, with permission to refuse, with the understanding that politeness is not more important than safety, because kids want to help. They want to be good. They want to be trusted. Those instincts can be used against them. I don't remember what the man looked like anymore. His face has blurred. His voice is gone. The details don't matter. What matters is that moment where instinct, training, and timing aligned just enough. I said no. He left. My life continued, and that's the scary part. How easily it could have ended differently without anyone noticing right away. How close danger can come without leaving visible scars. Even now, thinking about it, I feel that strange mix of calm and unease. Calm because nothing happened. Unease because something almost did. I didn't understand why my parents were so strict back then. I do now. That rule they drilled into me didn't protect me in an obvious, dramatic way. It protected me quietly, invisibly, in a moment that could have vanished into nothing, but instead became one of the most important memories of my childhood. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. I was around 11 years old when it happened, old enough to have a sense of independence, but still young enough to trust the world more than I should have. I had been riding my bike, doing what kids do, moving fast, taking turns too sharply, feeling free in that careless way that only childhood allows. I don't remember exactly how I fell. I probably hit a crack in the pavement or turned too hard. I just remember the sudden loss of balance, the scrape, the shock of hitting the ground. I wasn't seriously hurt. My knees stung, my hands were scraped, my heart was racing more from surprise than pain. I remember sitting there for a moment, catching my breath, brushing dirt off my legs, doing that quick internal check kids do to make sure nothing is broken. I could stand, I could walk. I was shaken, but fine. And then a truck pulled up. At first, it didn't feel threatening. Someone stopping to check on a kid who fell off a bike feels normal. It feels like the kind of thing adults are supposed to do. The truck came to a stop nearby, close enough that the engine noise filled the space around me. A man leaned out and spoke to me. He told me he could drive me home. I remember thinking how unnecessary that sounded. I was literally 3 houses away from my own front door. I could see where I lived. Home wasn't some distant place. It was right there. I told him I could walk. I just wanted to go home. That was the only thing in my mind. Get up, get inside, be safe. Instead of accepting that, he tried again. He told me my dad said to go with him. That sentence is the one that stayed with me. Even at 11, something about it didn't sit right. It didn't make sense. My dad hadn't been outside. He hadn't spoken to anyone. He wouldn't send a stranger to pick me up when I was basically already home. The logic didn't line up. I didn't fully understand why the situation felt wrong, but I knew enough to know that what he was saying didn't add up. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse him. I didn't scream. I just wanted to leave. I wanted to go home. I remember repeating that I could walk, that I was fine, that I didn't need a ride. For a moment, there was tension. Not dramatic tension, not loud or aggressive, but a quiet pressure. The kind that makes your stomach feel tight. The kind that comes from someone trying to convince you of something you don't want to do. I remember feeling trapped in that pause, unsure what would happen next. Then he gave up. He didn't insist. He didn't escalate. He didn't get out of the truck. He just drove off. Just like that. I stood there watching the truck leave, my bike beside me, my knee scraped, my heart still pounding. Then I picked up my bike and walked the rest of the way home. 3 houses, a distance so short it feels ridiculous now to think about how much weight it carries in my memory. At the time, I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't feel like a story yet. It didn't feel important. I had fallen. A man had offered help. I said no. Life continued. Kids move on quickly when nothing visibly bad happens. But memories don't always show their meaning right away. As I got older, the memory shifted. It changed shape as my understanding of the world changed. When you're a child, you see moments as isolated events. When you're an adult, you see patterns. You understand intent. You recognize manipulation. An adult offering a ride to a child who is 3 houses from home is not normal. An adult claiming a parent gave permission when they clearly didn't is not okay. An adult abandoning the situation the moment the child refuses is a red flag. Those things are obvious now. They were not obvious then. What strikes me most is how close to home it happened. Not in a park, not on a quiet road far away, not somewhere isolated. It happened practically in front of my house. That proximity creates a false sense of safety. You assume nothing bad can happen when you're that close to home. You assume danger requires distance. It doesn't. The fact that I just wanted to go home is important too. I wasn't trying to be brave. I wasn't trying to outsmart anyone. I wasn't thinking about kidnapping or harm. I just wanted to be inside, with my family, in a place that felt safe. That simple desire overrode whatever polite instinct I might have had to listen to an adult. I think about that line he used, telling me my dad said to go with him. That's a classic tactic, even though I didn't know it at the time. It tries to override a child's instincts by borrowing authority. It reframes disobedience as misbehavior. It puts the child in a position where saying no feels like breaking rules rather than protecting yourself. Even then, I knew it wasn't true. I didn't know why I knew, I just did. That's the strange thing about these memories. When you look back, you realize how often kids rely on instinct rather than logic. You don't always have the language or the knowledge, but you have a feeling. And sometimes that feeling is enough. The man never came back. I never saw him again. There was no resolution, no explanation, no confirmation of intent. That lack of closure makes the memory linger in a quiet, unsettling way. You're left with questions that can't be answered. What would have happened if I had gotten into that truck? What if I had believed him when he said my dad told me to go? What if I had been more hurt and unable to walk? Those questions don't have answers, and that's part of what makes the memory powerful. It exists in the space of almost something terrible, almost a life changed forever. For a long time, I didn't think of it as a close call. It was just a weird moment. But as the years passed, and as I heard more stories, and as I learned how predators operate, the meaning became clearer. That wasn't kindness. That wasn't concern. That was an attempt. The fact that he left so easily when I refused tells me everything. Someone genuinely trying to help would have insisted on getting an adult involved. They would have walked me to the door. They would have waited to make sure I was safe. He did none of those things. He tested the situation and moved on when it didn't work. That realization didn't hit me all at once. It settled in slowly, like a cold realization spreading through your chest. It made me rethink not just that moment, but other moments from childhood. Times when adults spoke to me. Times when something felt off, but I didn't have the words to explain it. I think about how easily kids can be manipulated with authority. How saying, "your dad said," or "your mom told me," can override instinct if the child isn't taught to question it. I think about how lucky I was that the lie didn't work on me. Not because I was especially smart, but because it simply didn't make sense in context. That context saved me. Being so close to home saved me. Wanting nothing more than to get inside saved me. I also think about how this moment shaped me in ways I didn't notice at the time. It didn't traumatize me immediately. It didn't cause nightmares or panic attacks. Instead, it quietly adjusted how I interact with the world. It made me more skeptical of unsolicited help, more aware of manipulation, more trusting of my own discomfort. Those lessons came later, but they came. What's unsettling is how ordinary the whole thing was. No shouting, no grabbing, no dramatic chase, just a conversation by the side of the road. That's how many dangerous situations actually look. Not like scenes from movies, but like normal interactions that take a wrong turn. I sometimes wonder how many kids have similar stories buried in their memories. Moments where something almost happened, but didn't. Moments that didn't feel significant until years later, when adult understanding reframed them as something else entirely. Those moments matter, even if nothing came of them. They remind you how thin the line can be between safety and danger, how quickly a normal day can brush up against something much darker, how much of survival depends on timing, instinct, and small choices. Looking back, I'm grateful for the part of me that didn't want to argue or explain, the part of me that just wanted to go home. The simplicity of that desire cut through the confusion. It didn't matter what he said. It didn't matter what excuse he used. Yeah, I just wanted to be inside my house. That instinct carried me through. Even now, years later, the memory still feels strange when I think about it. Not terrifying, exactly, but heavy. Like a reminder tucked into the back of my mind. A reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself clearly, and that listening to yourself can matter more than being polite. I don't replay the moment obsessively. It doesn't control me. But when it comes up, it brings the same quiet realization every time. That my life could have gone in a very different direction based on a few words and a few steps. 3 houses. That's all the distance there was between me and safety, and somehow that was enough. Once a young woman stepped onto a bus thinking she was simply going home. It was an ordinary evening. She was a student, out with a male friend after watching a film. Nothing about the night felt dangerous to them. They chose a bus because it was supposed to be a normal, affordable way to get back home. The bus was off-duty, but they did not know that. To them, it looked like any other ride through the city, just another part of everyday life. Inside the bus were 6 men. One of them was the driver. The others were already sitting there watching. From the moment the couple got on, something shifted. What should have been a short ride turned into something unimaginable. The bus did not take them home. Instead, as it moved through the streets of the city, the men attacked. They dragged the woman away from her friend. One by one, they raped her while the bus kept driving, circling the city. It did not happen in a dark alley or a hidden place. It happened on a moving bus, in public streets, while the city went on around them. Her friend tried to stop it. He fought back. For that, he was beaten badly. The men overpowered him, tied him up, and forced him to watch. He could not look away. He could not help her. He could only witness the violence as it continued. The assault did not stop with rape. It escalated into something even more brutal. The men used an iron rod to assault her repeatedly, causing devastating internal injuries. The pain was extreme. The damage was catastrophic. What they did was not just an attack on her body, but an attempt to destroy her completely. When they were finished, the men did not seek help. They did not leave the couple somewhere safe. They threw them both out of the bus onto the roadside, naked, bloodied, and broken as if they were trash. Then they drove away, leaving them there to die. For some time, the couple lay there barely conscious. They were severely injured. They could not call for help. They could not move properly. Eventually, passers-by noticed them. Strangers saw two human beings lying on the road, injured beyond comprehension, and they stopped. They called the police. They called for help. That small act of humanity is the only reason either of them survived the night. They were taken to a hospital in Delhi. Doctors fought to save the woman's life. Her injuries were severe beyond anything most people can imagine. She had suffered massive internal damage. Her condition was critical from the moment she arrived. Still, she held on. For days, she fought. News of the attack spread quickly. People were horrified, angry, sickened. What had happened was not an isolated incident, but this time the brutality was impossible to ignore. The story sparked something that had been simmering for a long time. Protests erupted across India. People flooded the streets demanding justice. They demanded change. They demanded that the country confront the reality of how women were treated, how unsafe public spaces had become, and how often violence was ignored or minimized. The woman became a symbol, not by choice, but by circumstance. She was no longer just a victim. She represented countless women who had been harassed, assaulted, threatened, and silenced. Her suffering forced a conversation that many had avoided for years. As days passed, her condition worsened. Doctors realized that she needed more advanced treatment than was available locally. She was transferred to a hospital in Singapore in the hope that specialized care might save her. Even then, the world watched and waited. People prayed, people protested, people hoped. 2 weeks after the attack, she died. She did not die quietly. She died after enduring unimaginable pain, after fighting for her life, after becoming the focus of a nation's grief and rage. Her death shook India and drew global attention. It was not just the loss of one young woman. It was the loss of trust in safety, in systems, in the idea that women could move freely without fear. All 6 men involved in the attack were arrested. The arrests brought some sense of accountability, but they did not bring peace. People wanted to know how this could happen, how 6 men, including a bus driver, could commit such acts without fear, how a public transport system could become a site of such violence. One of the men was later found dead in jail in March 2013. Authorities said he had taken his own life. Even that raised questions. Some felt anger that he escaped punishment. Others debated responsibility. For many, it was simply another layer of unresolved pain. Another attacker was 17 years old at the time of the crime. Under the law, he was treated as a juvenile. He served 3 years in a reform facility and was released in 2015. That decision caused widespread outrage. Many people felt the punishment did not match the crime. It reopened wounds and reignited debates about age, accountability, and justice. The remaining 4 men were eventually sentenced to death. They were hanged in Tihar prison, the capital's high-security facility. For some, this brought a sense of closure. For others, it did not. No punishment could undo what had been done. No sentence could bring the woman back. No execution could erase the trauma carried by her friend, her family, and a nation. What makes this story so devastating is not just the violence itself, but what it revealed. It showed how vulnerable women could be in everyday situations. It showed how predators exploited systems and silence. It showed how quickly an ordinary night could turn into a nightmare. Her friend survived, but survival does not mean recovery. He carried physical injuries, but also psychological scars that would last a lifetime. Being forced to watch someone you care about be destroyed, while being powerless to stop it, is a trauma that never truly fades. The protests that followed did lead to changes. Laws were reviewed. Conversations shifted. Awareness grew. But even now, years later, the story still hurts to hear. It still feels unreal. It still raises the same question over and over again. How did this happen? The answer is not simple. It lies in attitudes, systems, enforcement, silence, and fear. It lies in how violence against women is normalized or ignored until it becomes impossible to look away. This case forced the world to look. The woman's name became known around the world. But she was more than a headline. She was a daughter, a friend, a student, a person with plans and dreams. Those were taken from her in the most brutal way possible. Remembering her only as a victim does not do her justice, but remembering what happened to her matters. Because forgetting allows it to happen again. This story is not easy to tell. It is not easy to hear, but it is important. It reminds us that violence does not always come from dark corners. Sometimes it comes disguised as normalcy, as a bus ride home, as a routine night out. And it reminds us that change, when it comes, often arrives too late for the person who needed it most. Pardon the brief pause in our journey. If this is your first time listening, I'm glad you found us. If you want to keep these rainy nights and calm stories going, please subscribe to Shadow Archives. Think of it as keeping the lights low and the stories moving. Make sure to tap the bell so you never miss a moment of the dark. And now, let's return to where we left off. I was about 13 years old when it happened, right at that strange age where you're not really a child anymore, but you're also nowhere close to being an adult. I was small for my age, always had been. I looked younger than 13, probably closer to 11, the kind of kid people still mistook for someone who needed permission to be out late. At the time, I didn't think much about that. I just thought it meant people underestimated me sometimes. That day, I was walking with a group of friends. We were doing what kids that age do, hanging out, talking about nothing important, laughing, drifting from place to place without any real plan. There was safety in the group, even if we didn't consciously think of it that way. Being with friends made everything feel normal and harmless. We weren't doing anything risky. We weren't alone. We weren't paying attention to the world beyond our little bubble. The mall felt like a safe place. It was busy, full of people, full of noise and movement. Adults walking around with shopping bags, families with kids, music playing from stores. The kind of place parents let you go because it didn't feel dangerous. There were security guards, bright lights, cameras, all the things that are supposed to mean you're safe. I didn't know then what I know now about that area. I didn't know it was known for human trafficking. I didn't know that predators often choose places that feel safe, places where people assume nothing bad could happen because there are so many witnesses. I didn't know that crowds can make it easier, not harder, for someone to disappear. I was just walking with my friends. Then it happened. A guy, probably in his 20s. It came out of nowhere. I don't remember his face clearly. That's one of the strange things about fear. Some details sharpen, others blur completely. What I remember is the suddenness of it. 1 second, everything was normal, and the next second, his hand was on my arm. He grabbed me, not gently, not accidentally, It wasn't a bump or a misunderstanding. It was firm, deliberate. His hand closed around my arm like he had already decided what was going to happen next. There was intention in that grip. There was urgency. He tried to pull me away. My brain didn't respond the way you'd think it would. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't pull back. I froze completely. It was like my body shut down, like someone hit a switch and everything inside me went still. I remember feeling small in a way I hadn't before. He was suddenly aware of how tiny I was compared to him, how easy it would have been for him to overpower me if I had been alone. People talk a lot about fight or flight, but they don't talk enough about freeze. Freeze feels like betrayal by your own body. You want to move, you want to react, but you can't. Your muscles don't listen, your voice doesn't come out, your thoughts scatter. In that moment, I didn't think, this is dangerous. I didn't think, I need help. I didn't think anything coherent at all. There was just shock. What saved me wasn't my reaction. It wasn't something I did, it was my friend. One of my friends saw what was happening. She didn't hesitate, she didn't freeze the way I did. She grabbed me and pulled me hard toward her, toward the group, away from him. That sudden resistance broke whatever plan he had. The moment attention was drawn to him, the moment it was clear I wasn't alone or easy, he let go. And he ran, just like that. No argument, no explanation, no attempt to pretend it was a mistake. He didn't say sorry, he didn't act confused. He ran, fast, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as he had appeared. That detail still matters to me. If it had been a misunderstanding, if it had been innocent, he wouldn't have run. People don't run when they've done nothing wrong. They don't vanish when confronted. They don't flee the second someone intervenes. The fact that he ran told the truth in a way words never could. Afterward, everything felt unreal. My friends were talking, asking if I was okay, reacting with fear and anger. I remember nodding, saying yes, even though my body still felt disconnected. I remember my arm tingling where he had grabbed me. I remember my heart racing long after he was gone, but I didn't cry. Not then. At 13, I didn't fully understand what almost happened. I knew it was scary, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't have the context yet. I didn't know how bad it could have been. I didn't know how often things like that turn into something far worse. Part of me tried to downplay it. I told myself it was over. I told myself I was fine. I told myself I was being dramatic for still thinking about it. Life moved on. We kept hanging out. We went home. The day ended. But the memory didn't disappear. It sat somewhere inside me, quiet but heavy. It didn't show up every day. It didn't control my life. But it never fully left either. It would surface sometimes, unexpectedly, when someone stood too close. When a stranger touched my arm to get my attention. When I was in a crowded place and felt suddenly exposed. As I got older, the memory changed. Understanding does that. When you're young, you experience things without fully grasping their meaning. When you grow up, you revisit those memories with new knowledge, and suddenly they become much more frightening than they were at the time. I learned about human trafficking. I learned about how often teens are targeted, especially small ones who look younger than they are. I learned that predators look for moments of distraction, moments where friends are talking, laughing, not paying attention for just a second. I learned that malls are not safe the way we think they are. And I learned that the area that Mall was in was known for trafficking. So that piece of information hit me like a punch to the chest. It reframed everything. That wasn't just a random creep. That wasn't just someone being inappropriate. That was very likely an attempt to take me, to remove me from my friends, to get me somewhere else, somewhere private, somewhere I might not have come back from. The thought of that still makes my stomach drop. I think about how small I was, how young I looked, how easily I froze. I think about how quickly it could have gone wrong if my friend hadn't been paying attention, if she'd been looking at her phone, if she'd been a step behind, if I'd been walking slightly ahead of the group instead of in the middle. The difference between my life as it is now and a life that could have been defined by trauma or ended altogether came down to seconds. That's hard to sit with. I'm almost 30 now, and it still bothers me. Not in a way that dominates my life, but in a way that lingers, in a way that shaped how I move through the world. I'm more aware of my surroundings than I used to be. I notice exits. I notice people who stand too close. I trust discomfort even when I can't explain it. What bothers me the most isn't just the attempt itself. It's the freeze, the fact that my body shut down. For a long time, I felt ashamed of that. I wondered why I didn't fight, why I didn't scream, why I didn't pull away. It took me years to understand that freezing is not weakness. It's a survival response. It's automatic. It's not a choice. My body did what it thought would keep me alive in that moment, even if it doesn't look heroic or brave from the outside. And the truth is, I didn't need to be brave. I needed help. And I got it. I think a lot about my friend, how she saw it when I couldn't, how she acted without hesitation. She probably doesn't even realize how much she changed the course of my life. To her, it may have been a moment, a reaction, something she didn't dwell on afterward. To me, it was everything. I also think about how many kids don't have someone like that next to them. How many freezes turn into disappearances. How many moments like mine end differently because no one was watching, or because the person froze and there was no one to pull them back. That thought is heavy, and it doesn't really go away. Sometimes the memory comes back out of nowhere. I'll be walking through a crowded place and suddenly feel that old fear rise up, sharp and unexpected. My heart will race, my shoulders will tense. It doesn't last long, but it's there. A reminder written into my nervous system. It bothers me that the mall felt safe, that adults probably wouldn't believe how close it came, that if I told the story casually, someone might say, well, nothing actually happened. As if the outcome is the only thing that matters. Something did happen. Someone decided I was a target. Someone put their hands on me. Someone tried to take me. The fact that they failed doesn't erase the intent. I also think about how young I was, and how little control kids really have in situations like that. We teach kids to be polite, to listen, to not cause scenes. Then we expect them to suddenly break those rules when something goes wrong. That's not fair. That's not realistic. What saved me wasn't my training or my instincts. It was community. It was not being alone. It was someone else stepping in when I couldn't. As I get older, I realize how much that moment shaped my understanding of safety. I don't assume public places are safe just because they're public. I don't assume crowds protect you. I don't assume danger looks obvious. And I don't judge myself for freezing anymore. I was a kid. I was small. I was shocked. I survived. The memory still bothers me, and maybe it always will. Not because I'm weak, but because it was real. Because it showed me how close harm can come without warning. Because it showed me how quickly a normal day can tilt into something terrifying. Especially now, knowing what I know about that area, about trafficking, about how often these attempts succeed. The weight of it feels heavier. It makes me grateful in a quiet, serious way. Grateful for my friend. Grateful for timing. Grateful that I'm here to look back on it at all. That moment didn't define my life, but it left a mark. A line between before and after. A deeper awareness of the world and my place in it. I'm almost 30 now, and it still bothers me, but it also reminds me of something important. I wasn't powerless because I froze. I wasn't weak because I needed help. I'm alive because someone noticed, and because the moment broke the right way. And sometimes that's all survival really is. I was so young that time itself felt soft and blurry, like everything around me was wrapped in cotton. Sunday school wasn't a place I questioned. It was just another room filled with chairs that were too big, songs I didn't fully understand, and adults who smiled a lot. I was somewhere between 4 and 6 years old, still small enough to believe that any grown-up who spoke gently had to be safe. That belief sat deep inside me, unchallenged, unquestioned. There were only a few of us in that class, 5 kids maybe, small enough that every voice sounded loud when we sang, small enough that nothing felt anonymous. The teacher knew all our names. He touched our shoulders when we laughed too much, fixed our sleeves when they slipped down, knelt so his face was level with ours when he spoke. Everyone said he was kind. Everyone said he was good with children. I remember that being repeated, like a rule you weren't supposed to test. He had this habit that made me uncomfortable, but at that age, discomfort didn't come with words. It just came as a tight feeling in my chest, a strange urge to look at the floor. He would take a child's hand and hold it longer than needed. He would joke about how kids were messy, how their hands were always dirty no matter how much they washed them. He made it sound playful, like a silly grown-up thing, something we were too young to understand but were supposed to laugh at anyway. Each week he would focus on one child more than the others, not in a way that screamed danger, not in a way that would alarm a room full of adults, just enough attention to make that child feel chosen, singled out. At least, that's how it felt to me. When it wasn't my turn, I remember watching, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt, like I was glad it wasn't me, but also afraid that my turn would come again. When it was my turn, I remember his voice being calm and low, like he was sharing a secret. He talked about cleanliness, about how kids didn't know how to take care of themselves properly. He said he did the same thing for his own children at home. That sentence stuck with me even then. It made everything feel normal, acceptable, wrapped in the idea of family and care. Adults used words like that to make things safe. Family, clean, helping. One day, after the songs were over and the other kids were being gathered up, he told me to stay behind. Just me. The room suddenly felt much bigger, much quieter. The chairs looked taller. The walls felt closer. I remember standing there, unsure if I was in trouble, unsure if I had done something wrong. He smiled and told me it wouldn't take long. Just a moment, he said something about my hands again, about helping me clean up properly. I didn't question it. I didn't know how. I had been raised to believe that adults knew better, that they couldn't be wrong, that if something felt strange, it was probably because I didn't understand it yet. My parents weren't the kind who explained things or asked how I felt. They were distant, distracted, busy in ways I couldn't name back then. I learned early that staying quiet made life easier. As he was doing what he said he needed to do, the door opened. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden shouting, no gasp, no rush into the room. Just the sound of the door opening, the squeak of hinges. A pause that felt like it lasted forever. Another adult stood there, half inside the room, half out. For a second, I thought he was going to close the door and leave. I remember that fear clearly, even now. That sharp, sinking feeling that this strange moment would continue, uninterrupted. But the door didn't close. The man at the door hesitated. His face changed, just slightly. Not enough for a child to fully understand, but enough for me to sense that something was different. He asked what was going on. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't calm either. It had a careful edge to it, like he was stepping onto thin ice. The teacher answered quickly, too quickly. He repeated the same explanation he always used, the one about helping kids stay clean, about how children didn't know any better. He laughed a little, like it was all a misunderstanding, like the situation was harmless and ordinary. Then the man looked at me. He asked if I was okay. That question should have changed everything. It should have cracked the world open, but it didn't. Not then. I said yes. I nodded. I smiled, because that was what good kids did, because I didn't want to cause trouble, because no one had ever taught me that my discomfort mattered more than an adult's authority. Looking back, that moment hurts in a way I can't fully describe, not because I blame myself, but because I see how perfectly set up I was to fail that question. I was a child who had learned to survive by being agreeable, by saying yes, by trusting when I shouldn't have had to. The man didn't let it go. I didn't understand it at the time, but I see it clearly now. He didn't accept the easy explanation. He told me to find my parents. He told me to go home. His voice was firmer then, no room for argument. The teacher's smile faded just a little, enough for me to notice that was the end of it. At least, that's how it seemed. I went home. No one asked me questions. No one sat me down. No one explained why I had been sent away early. Life moved on, as it so often does when children are involved and adults decide silence is simpler. For years, the memory sat in my mind under a different label. Not fear, not danger, just something odd, a weird adult, a funny story, one of those strange things that happen when you're a kid and don't quite understand the world yet. I even laughed about it once or twice, telling it like an awkward anecdote, stripping it of its weight because that was easier than facing what it really was. It wasn't until I was around 30 that everything shifted. I was talking with a friend, the kind of late-night conversation where people open up about close calls, about moments that could have gone very wrong. I started telling my story the way I always had, half joking, casual, but halfway through something changed. I heard my own words differently. I saw the scene through adult eyes instead of a child's foggy understanding. The room I was sitting in felt colder. My stomach tightened. I stopped mid-sentence. That wasn't kindness. That wasn't help. That wasn't normal. It hit me all at once, like a wave breaking over my head. What I had experienced wasn't just odd behavior. It was abuse. It was grooming. It was someone testing boundaries, pushing them carefully, hiding behind authority and trust. He had been caught, not at the beginning, but in the middle. And if he hadn't been interrupted, I don't know how far it would have gone. That realization made me feel sick. What made me angrier, though, was what happened next. Or rather, what didn't happen. No one told my parents, no one called the police. There was no investigation that I know of. No consequences that followed him publicly. The matter was handled quietly, behind closed doors within the walls of the church. Adults speaking to adults, deciding what was best, deciding that silence was easier than truth. He moved away, took his wife, took his 2 daughters. I remember those girls. They were quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful but heavy. They didn't laugh much. They didn't cause trouble. At the time, I thought they were just shy. Now that memory twists in my chest. I can't help but wonder what their home was really like. I can't help but fear that what I narrowly escaped was something they couldn't. That thought still makes my blood boil. The idea that he was allowed to leave without consequences, without accountability, feels like a betrayal layered on top of another betrayal. The adults who knew, who suspected, who saw enough to be uncomfortable, chose to do nothing that truly mattered. They chose reputation over protection, comfort over justice. For a long time, I carried guilt I didn't understand. Guilt for not saying no. Guilt for not crying. Guilt for not answering that question differently. It took years to realize that guilt didn't belong to me. It never did. Children don't have the tools to fight manipulation. They don't have the language, the power, or the authority. They rely on adults to step in, to draw lines, to protect them when something feels wrong, even if they can't explain why. In my case, one adult did step in, just enough to stop it from going further. I am grateful for that, deeply. But one step wasn't enough to stop the pattern. It wasn't enough to protect the next child or the one after that. What haunts me now isn't just what almost happened to me. It's the silence that followed, the quiet agreement to let evil walk away unchallenged, the way people convince themselves that doing nothing is the same as doing no harm. It isn't. I think about that small room sometimes, the songs, the chairs, the door opening. I think about how close I came to something that would have changed my life forever. I think about how easily it was hidden, how easily it was dismissed. There's a saying that stuck with me after I finally understood the truth of my own story. It says that the only thing necessary for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. For a long time, I didn't fully grasp how real that was. Now I do. And that understanding is its own kind of horror. When I was 10, I regularly attended a choir club for kids. It was one of the few parts of my week that felt simple and safe. Singing with other kids, following the rhythm, trying to remember lyrics, laughing when someone messed up. It was ordinary in the best way. I never worried about how I would get home afterward because it was always my mom who picked me up. That was just how things were, predictable, routine, normal. So when my dad was the one waiting for me that day, it confused me. I remember walking out of the building, spotting his car, and feeling that small flicker of uncertainty. It wasn't fear at first, just confusion. I remember thinking maybe my mom was busy or sick or running late. Kids accept changes easily when they don't yet understand how much meaning they can carry. I got into the car. At first, the drive felt quiet but not alarming. My dad didn't talk much, but that wasn't unusual. He wasn't a big talker anyway. I stared out the window, watching familiar streets pass by, still trying to figure out why he was the one driving me home. Halfway through the drive, something changed. My dad started mumbling. At first, I couldn't understand what he was saying. His words were low, broken, like he was talking more to himself than to me. I leaned forward a little in my seat, trying to listen. Then I caught a few phrases that made my stomach twist. He said he was sorry. He said I would never see him again. At 10 years old, those words don't make sense right away. They sound dramatic, strange, unreal. I remember laughing nervously at first, asking what he meant, telling him to stop being weird. But he didn't answer. He just kept driving. Eyes fixed on the road, voice cracking as he repeated how sorry he was. I asked again and again. My voice was getting higher, more desperate. Fear was starting to creep in, slow and cold. I could feel it in my chest, like something tightening around my heart. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't normal. He still wouldn't explain. The rest of the drive felt endless. Every familiar street suddenly felt wrong. I remember thinking about my mom, about my little brother, about how quiet everything felt. When we finally reached our apartment building, I felt a rush of relief, like whatever this was would stop once we got home. But it didn't. My dad parked the car and didn't get out. He just sat there. Then he told me to leave the car. I hesitated. I asked him again what he meant. I asked him why he was saying these things. I remember my hands shaking, my throat tight, tears already starting to burn in my eyes. That's when he finally said it. He told me I would not see him again because he would be dead very soon for what he did. He said the police would answer my questions. I didn't fully understand the words, but I understood the tone. I understood that something terrible had happened, something irreversible. He pushed me to get out of the car, impatient now, urgent, like he needed me gone. I got out, the door closed, and the car drove away. I stood there for a second, frozen, my brain trying to catch up with my body. Then panic hit all at once. I ran toward our apartment, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I remember fumbling with the door, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The door was open. That alone was wrong. My mom always locked the door. Always. Even during the day. Even if she was just stepping out for a moment, seeing it open made my chest tighten even more. I stepped inside. The apartment was silent. Too silent. I called out for my mom. No answer. I called out for my little brother. Nothing. My voice sounded small and strange in the empty space. Then I saw it. A puddle of blood on the floor. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stared. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Blood was something I had only ever seen in movies or from scraped knees. This was different, darker, still wrong. That's when the police arrived. I don't remember exactly how they came in or who spoke first. I just remember uniforms, voices, and someone gently guiding me outside. They spoke softly to me, telling me I was safe now, asking me if I was hurt. Then they explained what had happened. My dad had attacked my mom. He was obsessively jealous, controlling, paranoid. He had found a pack of old condoms in a cupboard and decided that this meant my mom had cheated on him. He ignored the obvious facts, that we had recently moved into the apartment, that the condoms could have been left by previous tenants, that there was no real evidence at all. In his mind, none of that mattered. He had already decided. The police told me he had smashed her skull in with a full wine bottle. Even now, writing those words feels unreal. At 10 years old, I couldn't imagine what that meant. I couldn't picture it. I just knew it was bad. Very bad. The kind of bad that changes everything. The only reason my mum survived was because my little brother intervened. My brother was 7 years old. He had witnessed our dad attacking our mum. He had seen something no child should ever see. Somehow, despite his fear, despite his size, despite being just a child, he intervened. He distracted him. He gave my mum the chance she needed to survive. If he hadn't been there, the police told me, my dad would have killed her. That truth settled into me slowly, like poison spreading through my thoughts. My little brother saved our mum's life. My little brother carried that weight before he even understood what it meant. The police took me to the hospital. The ride felt endless. I remember staring at my hands, noticing how small they looked, how dirty they were. I remember the smell of the car, the sound of the siren, the way everything felt unreal, like I was floating above my own body. At the hospital, I saw my mum. She was alive. That was the first thing that mattered. She was hurt badly, bandaged, bruised, weak, but alive. When I saw her, I finally broke down. Everything I had been holding in exploded at once. I cried harder than I ever had before or since. My little brother was there too. He looked different. Older somehow, quieter, smaller and heavier at the same time. We didn't talk much. We didn't know how. We just existed in the same space, both of us trying to understand what had happened to our family in the span of a single afternoon. When my dad said I would not see him again, he meant he planned to kill himself after dropping me off. That knowledge hit later, like an aftershock. He didn't succeed. The police found him in time and had him committed to a mental ward. He didn't die that day, but the person I knew as my father did. Whatever relationship existed before that moment was gone forever. That day is still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. Not because of the blood or the police or even the violence itself, but because of how suddenly everything shattered. One moment I was singing in a choir. The next, my family was broken in a way that could never be fully repaired. The trauma didn't end there. My brother and I both suffered extreme mental trauma later in life because of that event. Nightmares, anxiety, fear, a constant sense of waiting for something bad to happen. We carried it differently, but we both carried it deeply. Sometimes I think about my brother more than anyone else. I think about what it meant for him to see his own father beating his mother nearly to death, to step in, knowing he could be hurt or killed. To carry that memory into adulthood. That kind of experience doesn't leave you, it reshapes you. Somehow we both turned into decent people. That feels almost miraculous when I think about it. We grew up in the aftermath of violence, fear, and control. Yet we didn't become cruel. We didn't become numb. We learned empathy the hardest way possible. I never really told my brother how grateful I am that he was there. I never told him how often I think about what he did. How many times I've replayed that moment in my head, knowing that without him, our mum would be gone. Knowing that our lives would have ended in a completely different way. I think I really should tell him. There are some words that feel too heavy to say, especially when they carry so much emotion. But gratitude like that deserves to be spoken. He deserves to know how much he mattered, how much he still matters. Despite everything my mum went through, she is the most cheerful and sweetest woman I have ever known. That is something I will never stop being amazed by. She survived an abusive marriage. She survived a near-fatal attack. She survived betrayal, fear, and unimaginable pain. And somehow she chose to keep living her life with kindness. Not fake happiness, not denial, real strength. She raised 2 children alone. She protected us. She loved us. She built a life from the wreckage of what happened. She didn't let bitterness consume her. She didn't let hate define her. It takes real strength to do that. I didn't understand it as a child. I understand it now. That day taught me things I wish I had never had to learn so early. That love can coexist with control. That jealousy can turn lethal. That danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people you're supposed to trust the most. It also taught me something else. That survival is possible, even after the worst moments of your life. That people can endure unimaginable trauma and still choose kindness. That children can be braver than anyone should ever have to be. That gratitude matters, even years later. This happened a long time ago, but it still lives with me. In small ways, in quiet thoughts, in moments where I catch myself checking locks twice, or listening too closely to raised voices, or feeling fear when things feel too calm. But it also lives with me in the form of love. Love for my mum. Love for my brother. Love for the life we managed to build after everything tried to destroy it. And maybe someday soon, I'll finally tell my brother what I should have said a long time ago, that he saved our family, and that I will always be grateful. A woman I worked with a few years ago once told me a story that changed the way I think about how fragile life really is. She didn't tell it dramatically. She didn't cry while she spoke. She didn't raise her voice or try to make it sound tragic. She said it quietly, almost like she was talking about someone else. That somehow made it worse. When I met her, she was working as a cleaner. She showed up on time, kept her head down, did her work, and left. People didn't pay much attention to her. If they did, they probably assumed this had always been her life, that she had always struggled, that she had always been where she was. But that wasn't true at all. She told me there was a time when her life looked completely different. She had a good job, a career she was proud of. She was married. She had a young daughter. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. They had plans, real plans. The kind you make when you believe the future is something you can build, if you're careful enough. They had decided to move to Spain. It wasn't an impulsive idea. It wasn't a fantasy they talked about and never acted on. They had done everything properly. They planned it. They saved. She had lined up a great job out there. Not just something temporary, but a solid opportunity that would set them up for a better life. A warmer place, a fresh start. More time together as a family. Everything was ready. The only complication was timing. Her current job needed her to stay a little longer than expected. Just a week or 2. It didn't seem like a big deal, so they decided her husband and their daughter would go ahead first. They would get settled. She would follow shortly after once she wrapped things up. It made sense. It felt practical. Safe, even. The day her husband arrived in Spain, he called her. She remembered that call clearly. He sounded happy, excited. He told her the house was lovely. He said the furniture had arrived by ferry just like it was supposed to. He talked about small, ordinary things, the kind of details you share when everything is going right. It was the sound of a life starting to unfold. She smiled while she listened. That phone call was the last time she ever heard his voice. At first, she didn't panic. People get busy when they move. Phones die, time zones get mixed up. She told herself all the reasonable things people say when they don't want to imagine the worst. A day passed, then another. She tried calling, she sent messages. Nothing came back. Her worry grew slowly at first, then all at once. She told me that feeling was unlike anything else she had ever experienced. A deep physical dread, not anxiety exactly, but something heavier, something that sat in her chest and refused to move. A sense that something was very wrong, even though she had no proof. After a few days with no contact at all, she called the authorities. She explained that she hadn't heard from her husband, that her daughter was with him, that this wasn't normal, that she was terrified. She needed someone to check on them. She needed to know they were okay. A few days later, she got the answer. Her husband and her daughter were dead. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Just like that. No violence, no warning, no dramatic event anyone could have predicted. Just a silent, or invisible gas filling a space that was supposed to be their new home. A place they thought was safe. A place meant to represent hope and a better future. They were found together. She didn't go into detail about how they were discovered. She didn't need to. The words alone were enough. Husband and daughter. Gone. In a foreign country. While she was still behind, finishing a job she would never go back to. The way she described that moment still haunts me. She said it felt like the world simply stopped. Not slowed down. Not tilted. Stopped. Like everything that had existed up until that point no longer applied. Plans became meaningless instantly. Time lost its shape. The future collapsed into nothing. She wasn't there. That fact became its own kind of torture. She wasn't there when it happened. She wasn't there to save them. She wasn't there to hold her daughter. She wasn't there to say goodbye. People tell themselves that not being present might soften the pain, that maybe it's better not to witness something terrible. But she told me the opposite was true. Not being there left her with questions that could never be answered. It left her imagining every possible version of their last moments. Did they fall asleep and never wake up? Did they realize something was wrong? Did her daughter cry? Did her husband try to protect her? There was no closure in not knowing. After that, her life unraveled quickly. She tried to go back to work, but she couldn't function. Everything reminded her of what she had lost. Every phone call felt like it might bring more bad news. Every quiet moment filled with images she couldn't control. Sleep became impossible without alcohol. At first, drinking helped her rest. Then, it helped her forget. Then it became the only way she could get through a day. She started drinking more than she meant to. Then more than she could hide. Then more than she could stop. The job she had worked so hard for disappeared. The career she built fell apart. Friends didn't know what to say. Some drifted away quietly. Others stayed for a while and then vanished too. Grief makes people uncomfortable. It doesn't fit into normal conversation. It doesn't resolve neatly. Eventually, she ended up where I met her, working as a cleaner, doing work that required no emotional investment. Work where she could show up, do the task, and leave without anyone asking how she was really doing. She told me she didn't recognize her life anymore. She used to be someone with plans, someone with a future mapped out, someone who thought if you did everything right, things would work out. Now she was someone who woke up every day and tried to make it through without breaking down. What scared her the most wasn't just the loss itself. It was how fast it happened. One phone call about a lovely house, a few days of silence, and then everything was gone. She said it taught her that life doesn't unravel slowly the way people think it does. Sometimes it snaps. One moment you're planning flights and furniture deliveries, and the next moment you're identifying bodies and trying to understand how you're supposed to keep breathing. She talked about guilt a lot, not logical guilt, not guilt that made sense, the kind of guilt that comes from surviving, from being the one left behind, from replaying decisions over and over, even when you know they weren't wrong at the time. What if she had gone with them? What if she had quit her job early? What if she had delayed the move? What if she had checked in sooner? She knew none of those questions had answers that could change the outcome, but that didn't stop her mind from asking them anyway. Grief doesn't care about logic. She also talked about how people reacted. At first, everyone was sympathetic. They brought food. They sent messages. They said all the right things, but grief doesn't end in a few weeks. It doesn't wrap up neatly. After a while, people expect progress. They expect you to start looking like yourself again. When she didn't, patience faded. Some people hinted she should move on. Some suggested therapy like it was a cure. Some quietly distanced themselves. She told me there's a particular loneliness that comes with grief, that deep. You feel separated from the rest of the world. Like everyone else is moving forward on a road you can no longer access. Their problems sound trivial. Their complaints feel surreal. You don't resent them, but you can't relate either. Alcohol filled that gap for her. It numbed the edges. It slowed her thoughts. It made the nights quieter until it didn't. Until it became another thing she had lost control over. Another reminder that the life she had planned was gone for good. She didn't tell her story for sympathy. She told it because she needed someone to understand how quickly everything can change. She said before it happened, she believed in safety, in planning, in doing things the right way. She believed that if you were careful, life would reward you with stability. Afterward, she understood that safety is often an illusion, that sometimes all it takes is a faulty appliance, a bad installation, or one invisible gas to destroy everything. Carbon monoxide doesn't smell. It doesn't warn you. It doesn't give you time. That thought terrified her. It wasn't just about her husband and daughter. It was about the randomness of it all. How unfair it felt. How undeserved. How there was no villain to blame, no decision that clearly caused it. Just bad luck in its purest form. She told me that knowing how random it was made it harder, not easier. There was nothing to fight against, nothing to fix, nothing to make sense of. Her story stayed with me long after she told it, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so ordinary in its beginning. A move, a job, a phone call about furniture, things that could happen to anyone. That ordinariness is what makes it terrifying. It reminds you that tragedy doesn't need chaos to arrive. It can slip in quietly, unnoticed, while you're busy planning a better life. When I think about her now, I don't just think about what she lost. I think about the version of her that existed before. The woman with a decent job, a husband, a daughter, a future in Spain. That version of her didn't slowly fade away. She disappeared overnight. And the woman who remained had to learn how to live in a world that no longer resembled the one she had built her hopes on. It is so scary to think how fast your life can change. One moment you are talking about a lovely house. The next moment you are grieving in a way that never fully ends. That story made me realize that none of us are as protected as we think, that the distance between an ordinary life and a shattered one can be measured in hours, sometimes minutes. That planning is important, but it is not a shield. That love can vanish without warning, leaving behind questions that will never be answered. And that sometimes the most terrifying stories are not the ones filled with violence or malice, but the ones where everything was supposed to be fine, because those are the stories that remind you how little control you really have. Once my child was finally steady enough on her feet to really walk on her own, I started teaching her things that most people thought were strange. Not tricks or games, not anything cute for videos or stories to tell later, but practical things, serious things. I showed her how to open the pantry door. I showed her which shelves were safe for her and which ones were not. I showed her how to press the water dispenser on the fridge and how to hold a cup under it without spilling too much. I showed her how to open simple packages of food that I kept within her reach, things that were already safe to eat without help. To everyone else, it looked unnecessary. It looked paranoid. It looked like I was just asking for messes, spills, crumbs everywhere, sticky hands, and extra cleanup. My husband thought it was extreme. My family thought I was overthinking things. They laughed about it sometimes, not in a cruel way, but in that dismissive way people have when they think you are worrying about something that will never happen. They said kids that young should not be worrying about feeding themselves. They said I was encouraging chaos. They said I was borrowing trouble from the future. I understood why they thought that. From the outside, it probably did look excessive. Most people do not want to imagine worst-case scenarios. Most people live assuming that tomorrow will look like today, and that if something goes wrong, someone will notice quickly enough to help. I did not have that luxury. At that point in my life, my husband worked away from home for a week at a time, sometimes longer. Sometimes in places where cell phone reception was unreliable or non-existent. There were stretches where I would not hear from him for days, not because he did not care, but because he physically could not reach out. When he was gone, it was just me and my child. I did not have anyone I spoke to every day, no daily check-in calls, no neighbors stopping by regularly, no routine visits. If something happened to me, there was no guarantee anyone would notice right away. It might take days. That thought settled into me in a way that would not go away. I had already heard stories that sink into your chest and refuse to leave. Stories about parents who died suddenly at home and children who were too young to understand what had happened. Stories where the child stayed with the body, waiting, crying, trying to wake them up. These stories where the child survived for a while, searching cabinets, pulling on doors, drinking nothing because they did not know how, and eventually dying of dehydration. Once you know those stories exist, you cannot unknow them. I would look at my daughter and imagine her alone in the house, confused and scared, calling for me and getting no answer. I would imagine her getting hungry, thirsty, tired. I would imagine her doing the only things she knew how to do, and the thought that she might not be able to help herself, even a little, was unbearable. So I decided that if something happened to me, she would not be completely helpless. I did not frame it as fear when I taught her. I made it normal. I made it routine. Opening the pantry was just another door. Getting water was just another thing grown-ups did that she could learn too. The food I left out for her was boring, simple, safe. Nothing special. Nothing tempting. Just enough. Yes, there were messes. Yes, there were spills. Yes, there were days when I cleaned the kitchen more than once. But every time I wiped water off the floor or swept up crumbs, I felt calmer. Those messes were proof that she knew how. They were proof that if she ever needed to, she could take care of herself in the most basic ways. That was worth any inconvenience. My family continued to tease me about it until one day I finally snapped. Not angrily, not dramatically, but firmly. I found an article that described a situation almost identical to the ones that haunted me. It was about a single mother who had died at home, and her toddler who stayed with her and eventually died of dehydration days later. The article did not sensationalize it. It just laid out the facts, quietly, brutally. I sent it to them. I did not add commentary. I did not argue. I did not explain myself further. I let the story speak for itself. After that, no one questioned my choices again. No one joked about messes. No one told me I was being dramatic. In fact, something else happened instead. My phone started ringing more often. Texts came in regularly, simple messages, nothing heavy. Just checking on you. How are you today? Everything okay? For a long time, someone in my family reached out every single day. They finally understood what I had been afraid of. What struck me most was how quickly people moved from disbelief to concern once they truly pictured it. Once they allowed themselves to imagine a toddler alone in a house, waiting for a parent who would never wake up, everything changed. Suddenly, my precautions did not look extreme at all. They looked reasonable, necessary even. That shift told me something important. Most people are not careless. They are just protected by distance from the worst possibilities. They assume safety because it is more comfortable than imagining tragedy. But once the distance disappears, once the danger feels real, priorities shift fast. Teaching my child those skills did not come from a belief that something would happen. It came from the understanding that something could happen. There is a difference between living in fear and living prepared. I was not afraid every day. I was not anxious all the time. I simply refused to ignore reality. There is a strange loneliness that comes with thinking this way. You feel like you are carrying a secret most people do not want to hear. When you plan for emergencies that involve death, people assume you are morbid. They do not see the love underneath it. They do not see the instinct to protect your child, even in scenarios you hope never come true. I did not want my daughter to ever need those skills. I still do not. But knowing she has them gives me peace. As she grew older, the lessons evolved. She learned how to ask for help, how to recognize when something was wrong, how to use simple tools safely, how to open doors, how to speak clearly to adults. None of it was taught with fear. It was taught with confidence, with the message that she was capable, not vulnerable. Looking back, I realized that those choices shaped more than just emergency readiness. They gave her a sense of independence early on, a quiet confidence. She knew she could solve small problems. She knew she had options. That kind of knowledge stays with a person. Sometimes I think about that article again, about the child who did not make it, about how close those stories can be to any of us, not because we are careless or negligent, but because life is unpredictable. Bodies fail, accidents happen, time passes without warning. What happened to that mother and child was not a moral failure. It was a tragic combination of isolation and chance, and that is what scared me the most. Not villainy, not neglect, just silence. Silence is dangerous when no one is listening for you. That is why I did what I did. That is why I ignored the laughter and the raised eyebrows. That is why I accepted the messes. Because the alternative was unthinkable. People often say things like, "Why, that would never happen to me," or "someone would notice," or "I would be fine." Those are comforting beliefs. They are not guarantees. I learned that preparedness does not mean expecting disaster. It means respecting the possibility of it. It means loving your child enough to imagine the worst and still choosing to act. When my family started calling and texting every day, part of me felt relieved. Another part felt sad. Sad that it took a tragedy happening to someone else for them to understand. But I did not hold that against them. Fear works differently for everyone. Now, when I see parents teaching their children small survival skills, I do not judge. I do not assume paranoia. I assume experience or empathy or awareness. I assume they have seen or heard something that changed the way they look at the world. Because once you understand how quietly things can go wrong, you cannot go back to pretending they never will. And if teaching a toddler how to get a cup of water buys even a single extra hour, a single extra chance, then every spill is worth it. Every crumb is worth it. Every sideways look is worth it. Love does not always look gentle. Sometimes it looks like preparation.